I'm Haley B. Miller, and this is Ohio Politics Explained, a podcast where you give us 15 minutes and we give you all the news you need to sound smart and impress your friends. Welcome to a special episode of Ohio Politics Explained. Today, we're going to dissect Issue 1. And no, I'm not talking about the Abortion Rights Amendment or that wonky thing we voted on last August. This Issue 1 on the November ballot would change how Ohio draws congressional and state house maps. Again. To help me break this down, I'm joined by Jesse Balmert, who's been in more redistricting commissions than I would ever care to be. I also spoke with people who are for and against Issue 1. You'll hear from them in a little while. To kick us off, Jesse, I have a very basic question for you. What's redistricting? What's gerrymandering? Why do we care?
Yeah, so redistricting is a really important issue and impacts how politics works or sometimes doesn't work, but it can also sound like a nerdy geography lesson. So while some politicians represent the entire state, think U.S. senators or governors, many elected officials serve a portion of the state in Congress or the Ohio State House, and these segments are called districts. Typically, these districts are redrawn every 10 years after the U.S. Census data comes out so that we can kind of redistribute the population. So if Columbus is growing, it deserves more representatives, and if a different part of the state is shrinking, maybe it gets fewer representatives. And then gerrymandering comes in when you're manipulating the redistricting process to give one party an unearned advantage over their opponents. And this is a problem because it creates districts where one party is virtually guaranteed to win. That turns the real contest into the primary, and that can lead to more extreme politicians. Both parties gerrymander when they are given the chance, so it's more of a don't hate the players, hate the game kind of situation.
Yeah, it's interesting because I'm from Illinois originally, who a lot of people say is very clearly a Democratic gerrymandered state. And then now I'm in Ohio, and a lot of people think that the maps here are gerrymandered for Republicans, which we will get into. But to underscore your point, it's a bipartisan activity.
Yeah, if you have the power of the pen, it's really hard not to use it.
So give us then the 10,000 foot view on how redistricting would work under this new amendment.
Yeah. So first, let me explain how redistricting works now. If your listeners might remember, Ohioans voted on some anti-gerrymandering rules in 2015 and 2018. And it set up this process where the Ohio Redistricting Commission is involved. That commission has 4 lawmakers and 3 statewide elected officials. Because of the way elections went, the balance currently is 5 Republicans and 2 Democrats. And they craft the state legislative maps, so Ohio House, Ohio Senate, and then they can help with the congressional map if lawmakers can't agree. So that's how we do it now. Issue 1 would replace that whole process with a group of 15 people on a citizen commission. That would be 5 independents and then 5 people who represent the two largest political parties, which right now and for centuries has been Democrats and Republicans. But I think they want to leave some wiggle room in case, I don't know, the Purple Party comes out in the next 50 years. These commission members could not be elected officials, lobbyists, political consultants on campaigns, so people really, really connected to politics. There would also be new rules on how to draw maps, so focus on drawing maps that closely correspond to how Ohioans vote in statewide elections. They would have to keep communities of interest together. They couldn't consider where current lawmakers live, but they also get rid of rules that limit how many times you can divide a city or a county or municipality.
And as you noted, we did this in 2015 and 2018. So if this feels like deja vu to our listeners, I mean, it very much is. If you were living and voting in Ohio just a few years ago, this has been a really contentious topic for some time now. And a big reason why this is on the ballot again is because the process in 2022 just kind of completely went off the tracks. Former Ohio Supreme Court Justice Maureen O'Connor, a Republican, was the Chief Justice at the time when the court struck down multiple maps that year. And she said this process didn't work specifically because politicians were at the table.
I say that there was a Trojan horse that was built into the amendments, and that is the makeup of the Redistricting Commission. And there are 7 politicians on that commission. And the politicians have devised maps that have one purpose, and that is to strengthen their position, their political position, their power, their party's power, and to ensure re-election for them and the legislators who are all on the same team, with the ultimate goal of achieving a supermajority.
What do the maps from all of that look like? Like, what do we have now?
Yeah, so I'll share some percentages with you. Former President Donald Trump, who's Republican, won the 2020 race in Ohio with 53% of the vote. Senator J.D. Vance won his seat in 2022 with 52% of the vote. However, Republicans currently hold 2/3 of the seats in Congress, 68% of the seats in the Ohio House of Representatives, and a whopping 79% of the seats in the Ohio Senate. Now, some of that is Republicans outperforming in these Democratic districts, but it just shows how kind of disproportionately Republicans control state government compared to how they do when we're voting statewide.
Yeah. At the same time, opponents of issue 1 look at our maps, look at those numbers and say, this is the process working as designed. Democrats, in the end, even voted for the current districts we have now, which Republican Representative Brian Stewart was quick to point out when he and I chatted about this. The no side is also borrowing tactics from proponents to say, actually, if you don't like gerrymandering, you should vote no. Here's Stewart.
The maps that we've had have been as close as we've had to lines that make sense. Issue 1 would toss all of that in the trash can, and issue 1 would say that we are going to essentially mandate and guarantee gerrymandering because we're getting away from that requirement that keeping communities together is the top objective. And instead, we're going to go towards a requirement in issue 1 that we artificially draw lines to artificially create more safe seats for Democrats to win. Well, when you're artificially drawing lines to achieve a predetermined outcome for one political party, we have a word for that. It's called gerrymandering.
Do you see this messaging confusing voters?
Put simply, yes. Gerrymandering is a confusing concept to begin with, and now you have both sides saying that they're the ones who are going to end gerrymandering. It's certainly a strategy on the no side because confused voters tend to vote no on issues.
Yeah, I remember that being talked about a lot with August issue 1 last year, that if it wasn't properly conveyed to people, they were probably just going to vote no because it was super wonky.
Yeah, it's easier to keep the status quo if you're not entirely sure what the changes are going to be.
Right. Let's dig even more into the weeds than we already are. O'Connor told me citizens, not politicians, looked to other states when they drew up this amendment and tailored it to Ohio. She even said that Ohio's proposal is, quote, the gold standard for citizen commissions. I mean, is that true? What have we seen play out in other states?
So the results have been mixed, and it really depends on who's on the commission, what's the balance of the commission, do you have independents involved? So Ohio's proposal would have 5 Republicans, 5 Democrats, and 5 independents, and certainly that balance would help. But what was considered perhaps the previous gold standard, Michigan, has also had some problems. A lawsuit successfully challenged about a dozen state house districts in the Detroit area, saying that they were disenfranchising Black voters by kind of swooping these districts into the suburbs. Map makers then went back to the drawing board, redid those maps, and the court was satisfied. So if you want to say Michigan didn't get it right on the first time, they didn't. If you want to say, well, there was a transparent process that allowed them to fix it the second time, people could argue that side too. We also have other states like Arizona, which only has 5 members on their commission. And you have one powerful independent who is kind of like the swing. And that resulted in some problems as well. So you really need to look at the structure. The proponents of this measure think they got it right. And we'll see.
Yeah. And I asked O'Connor about that Michigan lawsuit because I've heard that brought up a lot since this campaign started. And she said Ohio's not going to see those same issues.
Let's look at here in Ohio, under the current system that we have, the ones that the politicians want to keep, these amendments. There's a lawsuit over the treatment of racial minorities in the 6th congressional district. And so to point fingers at Michigan and say, see, these citizens commissions don't work, there was this lawsuit that in the big scheme of things, it was a pretty small, blip. They fixed it. Why did they have that in Michigan? They hired the wrong people to give them advice and to draw the maps. First one, they would be the first ones to admit that that's what happened. That's not a secret. That won't happen here in Ohio.
Now, the general pitch by proponents is that a citizen commission will be more accountable to voters. Ohioans struck down the August issue 1 proposal last year, then turned around and voted for abortion rights and legal marijuana. And those were all losses for the GOP-controlled legislature. Abortion, marijuana, those are things that they very much have not been interested in expanding access to in recent years. Despite that, Stewart disputed that lawmakers are out of sync with voters around the state.
If that was the case, then, Ohioans continue to elect 22 of 22 Republicans to statewide office. Ohioans continue to elect Republicans to the state legislature, even in districts where Democrats are favored to win. And so, it's not unusual that a body of elected legislators may have a different view on an issue than if you just, try to make policy based on who signs a petition outside Kroger.
Do you feel like that's going to be kind of the main message that people hear in the next month or so, that we need to stop gerrymandering because lawmakers aren't listening to the people who voted for them?
Yeah, I think the yes side is going to continue to hammer this message that politicians aren't listening to them and can't be trusted. And if you look at favorability ratings for the federal government, for example, 1 in 10 Republicans say they can trust the federal government, and Democrats aren't much better at about 39%. So that's probably a message that's salient for them. I think on the other side, the no side is really pitching this as a Democratic power grab. And that's not a horrible strategy when you're in a presidential year when Donald Trump is expected to win pretty handily. So I think those are the messages you'll see between now and November 5th.
And it's interesting because this whole citizens, not politicians, this whole debate around gerrymandering is predicated on getting elected officials out of this conversation. But a lot of elected officials are at the table on both sides.
Yeah, it's interesting. Obviously, Justice Maureen O'Connor was a former Supreme Court Chief Justice, a former Lieutenant Governor. And then when you look on the no side, you have people like former President Donald Trump is opposed to this issue. Governor Mike DeWine has made his concerns with it known. So yes, plenty of politicians as we talk about citizens, not politicians.
So you mentioned the messaging. What else can we expect from this campaign in the final weeks? I mean, I feel like I'm bombarded with Senate ads all the time, and I don't know if there's enough oxygen for the rest of the...
Yeah, so a lot of ads, a lot of flyers. To your point, the Ohio Senate race is going to suck up so much oxygen. It's going to make it really expensive to campaign on either side of this issue. And so the yes side has, close to 20 million reserved. The no side has put in around 2 million so far. The yes side is going to have more money to make their case. And so we'll see what that looks like on your television screens. But, expect Sherrod Brown and Bernie Moreno to be the main ones featured.
Well, we just threw a lot of information at you all, a lot of numbers. This is a very complicated in the weeds issue. Like we said, Jessie has done a ton of work on redistricting in general and covering this issue. You can check out her very helpful explainers on any of our websites.
Yeah, it's a complex topic and it's a complex measure, so it's worth digging into and taking a look at what it would do.
Ohio Politics Explained is brought to you by the USA Today Network Ohio Bureau. You can check us out on X, formerly known as Twitter, @Ohio Explained.